Okay. Come here. I know. Oh, come on. Oh.
Hey.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Let me tell you something. Let's take a moment here that I am so proud of myself because I can't believe I figured that out.
What did you do?
So I went, I have a monster underneath my chair right now. I went into the tutorials and I just figured out that I had to give it permission to go into my microphone. Like what you were saying. So I went into settings and then specifically allowed Fire Talk to go to my speaker. Thank you.
Bravo, bravo. Hey, it's funny, we're kind of meeting for the first time in a way.
Face to face. Isn't that cool? Technology is really cool sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I guess both of our lighting's like not studio, but that's fine, right?
Listen, I want everyone to know that this is not supposed to be professional. This is just two people chatting. I initiated this conversation because I really wanted to learn more about you. I wanted to ask you some questions about your amazing book. I really, everything happens for a reason. And, your book came into my life exactly when it was supposed to come into my life. I was ready to receive it. I read it. I'm almost done. I didn't completely finish it, to be honest with you. I have 4 kids. It's crazy,
Yeah.
But it spoke to me in so many ways. So I would love to start there if you are okay with that.
Let's go.
Okay.
You're the boss.
Yeah. So first of all, I would love for you to talk a little bit about your education and start there because I think this is really fascinating.
So it's very interesting to ask the question about education because immediately, and you're just going to find me an impossible person to interview. So immediately what comes to mind for me is, well, what is education really? And so what I'll do is I'll answer conventionally, but then I'm going to kind of twist it up a little bit.
Okay.
So I feel like I had 3 forms of education that created this sort of strange entity called Jonathan.
Mm-hmm.
One is, of course, conventional education. So I feel I was very fortunate at a young age that my parents were approached by my kindergarten teacher, who was simultaneously, excited and concerned about me. And she said, there's something different about this kid. And I don't totally get it, but you should probably get him into a private school as soon as possible. Okay. And part of her concern was that if I wasn't in a private school, I might actually just drop out. And I think that had to do with the second sort of dimension to my ongoing lifelong education has been what I would call just sort of spontaneous, direct experiences of our, spiritual world. And we can maybe define that better later. But the point being that I was always very self-directed, always very driven, always, doing my own research and always having an experience of the world that was leading me. And so fitting into other formats was not always easy. And I think that what happened in that, because I went to the same school for 12 years, was it set the stage for me to continue to love learning. It was an environment that promoted the love of learning. It was an environment that had a lot of dynamic opportunities. So as a teenager, I got to do, model United Nations and all that kind of weird stuff.
Yeah.
And it encouraged young people to be independent thinkers. And so I'm talking about high school and elementary school even because during those times in my spare time, I was reading, scripture from traditions around the world, and I was interviewing people, gurus and rabbis and priests and native elders. So again, it was conventional education, but my own process of research and education going on concurrently. And then, of course, the third, which was, spontaneous experience. But then in university, I decided I wanted to look at the practical applications of all this. And so my bachelor's, my master's, and my PhD all had a comparative religion focus, but then drew on other traditions, typically psychology. For my master's, I was also doing community health sciences and nursing and public health. My PhD was drawing on, again, counseling studies, divinity studies. And the thing that people probably need to understand is that comparative religion is not what a priest or a rabbi does when they go to become ordained. That's a different kind of training. That's theology. Comparative religion is a social science, and it looks at the phenomena of spiritual experience and tradition through lenses like psychology, anthropology, even medicine in some cases. So my orientation was always around healing and consciousness. Those are my two areas. And the final thing I would say is that, so as I went through this channel of conventional training, my personal experiences continued, but my research took me far and wide because I was kind of a spirituality geek, so I wasn't really into anything else. I wasn't spending my money on anything else. While I was 22, and I guess 22-year-olds were spending money on parties and things like that, I was on a full scholarship and working and saving my money for buying books and travel. And I wanted to go and see the things I was studying firsthand, to try them firsthand, to experience them firsthand. And so that's really kind of defined my life. And I'm still very much a student and still so eager to learn and kind of, I'm open to experience just about anything.
Well, first I have to say, I just want to get there. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. One, I have to say, you're obviously very blessed to have known what you wanted to do this whole time. You didn't go off into different directions. You really followed your heart and your life path, and I commend you for that. That's a beautiful blessing. It really is, because not everyone, not everyone sticks on that path. They get very distracted. And, as you said in your book, I think you said this in your book, you said, we live in a culture that doesn't put spirituality first,
right?
Material things and life gets businesses. That's really the importance of this world. And sadly, spirituality really gets that back burner. And, you didn't fall to that. You really stuck with that, and you made your business part of that and your whole life a part of that. So that's awesome. The reason why I brought this up is because one of the fascinating things I find about you is that you're not just an academic with this formal education, sitting in an ivory tower, just reading book after book. You really walk the walk. As I'm reading your journey, you really put yourself out there and went around the world, and meeting all these different types of people. one, I'm jealous. I really wish I could,
We'll make a tour.
What?
We'll make a tour.
Oh, I would love to. Maybe, my kids are grown. I could do something like that. But I mean, geez, your journey is just fascinating. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, the first thing I can say is that there is an unwritten book. I don't know if I'll ever write it, of the even weirder things that I've done.
I'm sure.
But I didn't think that was appropriate for the first one. Well,
ease us all in.
What's that?
Ease us in.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's funny because I appreciate the acknowledgement, but I have to say it wasn't as heroic as it seems, because it was such a drive for me. Mm-hmm. And I think that, interestingly, from an academic perspective, when we look at unique religious figures like what we might call sages and mystics and shamans and these kinds of spiritual specialists, mm-hmm. Kind of like a lot of other fields in life, it's a very strong inborn aptitude and drive. Mm-hmm. It's mm-hmm. very, and this from knowing extremely successful people and top performers, people who tend to be at the top of their field tend to be people who have been driven by the field, that they could almost not do anything else and survive. And that's the way it always felt for me. It literally, and I know sometimes it sounds almost psychotic, because to be psychotic is not extremely different, but it really was as though there was an invisible reality pulling me forward, showing me step after step. And it just literally didn't feel good inside to say no.
Right.
It really felt like there was something there. And I think that what perpetuated it was the fact that each experience I had affirmed the other experiences, the worldview that I felt I had. And so magic was becoming real, And I'll tell you just a quick example, because you asked me to elaborate a little bit, So things would happen. Like, I remember I had finished my bachelor's degree, and I bought a ticket, which at the time was affordable. It was a round the world ticket. I don't even know if they sell them anymore. Okay. And basically, as long as you stayed in one hemisphere and went in one direction, you could get off multiple times.
Okay.
So I planned to stop in China, Australia, India, and then Africa. And I ended up in New Zealand also. And of course, this is a very long story about what happened, but I had no plans for anything but visiting friends in China. And the rest was just sort of supposedly going to look after itself. Okay. And 2 days before I got on that plane, I was at a museum where I lived in Canada at the time, Winnipeg. Mm-hmm. And there was an exhibit that I didn't even know was running. And it was East African art. And I remember going in and, checking it out, seeing if, anyone could go, and it was open to the public. And I was looking at this tapestry, and I noticed it was from Tanzania, where I was going. And I thought, wow, like, this is kind of cool, right? Like, it's sort of like the universe saying, oh, get ready for your trip. I thought that was the gift. And then I noticed this man standing beside me, and he says, oh, do you like this? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, this is from my home country, Tanzania. I said, oh, that's amazing. I'm going to be there in a few months. And of course, by the end of the conversation, he's invited me to come to his house for dinner that night. He's given me the name and phone number of his sister in Tanzania, who I'm going to stay with, and then his father in a rural town, Dodoma. And I couldn't have planned it better. And it was like that. Time after time after time. I could do this for hours, tell you.
The universe was just leading you where you needed to. That's what it sounds like, right?
Yeah. Now, I should interject and say, after I got deeper into the world, the professional side of all this, mm-hmm. as an author and a speaker and doing media and working at a, kind of a famous resort and so on, and being married and having my first child, I have to say, the magic changed. And I don't know if that's because my focus became much more, let's say, balanced. I wouldn't say I've ever really put the earth world first, but I think it used to be so dramatically spiritually driven, and then it kind of leveled out. And that is the real phenomenon of being a human being with bills and kids and demands. And the reason why I want to bring this up is because I had some pretty bizarre stuff happen. Well, bizarre is probably not the right word, but I had some bumpy times just in my own personal life. But I count those as equally as valuable as the travels to meet extraordinary healers or to visit temples or whatever it was. I don't want to say one was more important than the other, but in the end, I went through a divorce. I went through a terrible situation with a business that didn't pay me for 3 years of work and basically was on the edge of bankruptcy, relocating, countries and things. But by treating them like spiritual experiences, they deliver just as much wisdom as any other experience. Does that make sense?
Oh,
I didn't separate.
If
I'm with a shaman, it's spiritual, and I'm with my son, it's not,
No, and all the heartaches and hardships that you went through. I think that's a really fantastic way of viewing it. And I wish more people would see things that they go through as just another way of becoming more spiritual. As you're growing as a human being, and you're growing spiritually as well. And I completely understand what you're saying. My daughter, she drew a picture because I'm always, I wish I could go around the world, like I was saying, and experiencing all these things. My daughter drew a picture one day, and it was of a wolf, and she says, this wasn't to me. She says, what you are trying to find is already there.
Wow.
Yeah. I should show you this. I was like,
that's great.
I saw it. I was like, Isabella, why did you draw this? She goes, I don't know. I just had to draw. I just drew it at school. And here you go. My daughter, no matter where I want to go in the world, everything you need is right within you. And you've said that a couple times in your book as well. And that's why I really enjoyed it. But it's, I do understand what you're saying. So all of it has a value.
Yes.
Everything has a value.
Yes, and yet, one of the focuses of the book is this idea of spiritual practice. And I think the thing that escapes people and where we sometimes get mixed up is that there's something between, the kind of traveling to India and studying with a guru and calling everything spiritual at home. And what's in the middle is really the way you participate in life. In other words, it's not enough to say, well, I don't need to travel to be spiritual. That may be true, but there's still work to be done, which means when your disappointments arise, when there's health challenges, when there's parenting problems, when there's money problems, do you literally treat it like a spiritual practice? And it's funny because the life path is one of the topics in the book. And it talks about how it's the most common thing for modern spiritual seekers to say, well, my life is my spiritual practice. But I like to point out that is probably the easiest thing to say and the hardest thing to do. It's easy to say because you're always living your life, so no one could doubt that your life is potentially your practice.
Whether you like it or not, you're doing it. You're going through it.
Right. But to actually take every disappointment and just say yes to it. And keep your heart open to it and say, how people get their parking spot when they're late for a meeting and they say, oh, the universe wants me to be on time. I got a parking spot. Well, what do they say when they don't get the parking spot? Is the universe no longer on their side? Is God no longer everywhere? It doesn't go on and off like a switch. So the question is, so what's that learning about when it's not what you want? And I think that a lot of the spiritual world, teachers and seekers alike, have become oriented around getting what we want. I think a big part of life as a spiritual practice is actually learning to grow and love and learn from when we don't get what we want.
Or things that we didn't even ask for.
Yeah.
Things that we didn't even expect.
Yeah.
you have no answer for. Why did this happen to me? I don't understand.
Right.
You know, some things we're just not meant to understand. It's just, as a human being, it's how we internalize it and how we deal with it.
Yeah.
You know, I agree. I wish people would live like that instead of, you know, succumbing to addictions or succumbing to depression or, you know, disorders. I really wish they would, you know, take their life challenges and turn it around, you know, and make it that, you know, that learning experience and grow from that.
And you know, it's interesting. The word grow is what I was just playing in my mind. You know, one of the topics that I'm very interested in the field of consciousness is flow states. What are flow states? How are they triggered? Who has them? And so on. Well, one of the actual hallmarks of people that are predisposed to flow states or are able to access them is a growth mentality, which means there is a perpetual idea that we can learn and better ourselves in each and every moment. And I say that because this is something that is clearly supported in all fields of success. It's supported by brain science. And that's worth keeping in mind, because sometimes people will listen to a conversation like ours and say, well, you know, they're just telling themselves there's a spiritual world. They're just telling themselves the universe is doing this and that and the other. And I'm saying, well, if this is just an experiment, it's a functional one. And if this is just an illusion, it's one that creates a life experience that is rewarding and resilient and extraordinary. And if you have something better than that, go for it. But I'd say that the spiritual path, since the beginning of human record, has been the very thing to define what creates a life of meaning and resilience. Right.
Why don't you explain to everyone what spiritual awakening means?
This is a great, another great question. Well, so this term is definitely debated and discussed differently in different circles. So let's kind of go again from sort of the academic to the personal. From an academic perspective, the study of mysticism is the study of ultimate states of consciousness and the people who have those experiences. In other words, mysticism as a field is defined as the study of the direct experience of ultimate reality. And they capitalize U and R in the literature, ultimate reality, which means that when a person has a mystical experience, they feel directly and immediately that they are encountering the very foundation of existence, God, spirit, consciousness, whatever they understand the source as. And a radical enough experience of this nature can have a lasting effect, which people would call awakening. So awakening simply suggests a kind of a broad term that means that there is a reality or a design, or you might even say a presence behind the world that we're used to. And that as long as we are unaware of that, it is as if we were asleep, that we are dealing with a limited slice of reality, fixated on the material and the emotional, and that as we encounter these other dimensions to who we are, we go through a process, whether it's gradual or sudden, of awakening, meaning shedding the old ways of seeing things and coming to understand a fuller picture of life. So just to kind of finish, in the study of mysticism, though, there's certainly a lot of visions and versions of, well, what is awakened and what do you count as awakened and who's enlightened, and is enlightenment the same as salvation? And I can definitely say that all traditions boast a peak state. And I think whether it's literally or metaphorically, there's great parallels between all of them. And it relates to reconnecting with the oneness of all things and knowing oneself as a part of that reality, that we are an expression of the divine. The tricky part then is, what does that look like in everyday life? So the two things I would just finish by saying is that I do believe that we've idealized awakening in the sense that we think there's a goal. But my personal experience is you can cross the threshold of profound awakening and see God in every moment and still have struggles, still have shadow, still have human experiences to work with. And I think people forget that. So a lot of seekers want to just wake up and stop being parents or stop being employees and start being mystics, but it's not like that. You still have to get out of bed and pay the bills and feed the dog. And so in that respect, it's important that we aspire to the process of awakening, but do not idealize an end state, and further understand that it isn't, as you said, something eventual and out there, but it's literally how do we take that first cup of tea or coffee in the morning? What are the last thoughts on our mind before bed? It's a very active, engaged work.
So it's basically saying that we can seek, we could find, but at the end of the day, we have to have balance as a human. We are here for the human experience. Am I kind of Yes,
no, you're onto it. In fact, what I would say, no, you've caught something really important, is so if you imagine like a circle, and we start in this very human place where we're disconnected from our spiritual nature, and then we begin to travel around the circle, and then we reach this diametrically opposed opposite where, oh my gosh, I'm not really a human being, I'm a spirit on a human journey, that whole thing. Well, there's another side of the circle, which is the integration of this knowledge into this world. And I believe no matter how you cut it, we're here to be human. And we're not here to escape that. And too often spirituality becomes an escape mechanism. I do think that some people are hardwired to be whatever monks and mystics and live off in caves and so on. But I'd say for most of us, the value of what they teach or what they access or bring back has to be integrated into everyday life. And that struggle of integration, if we go back to our circle, is the same for the mystic that has to journey back into the human experience as it is for the human that is trying to get to the spiritual experience. We may be going different ways, but we're all still grappling with the task of integration, which means loving the whole self, the whole experience, and believe it or not, accepting the world as it is, which doesn't mean tolerating it, liking it, but it means affirming this is what is, and I will work from here with clear sight and open heart, and then if I need, become an advocate of change.
Do you feel that technology and social media and the media and the entertainment industry and even religion in of itself, religion as an institution, you know what, take that aspect out of it, because that's a whole different topic. Stick to the social media, technology, and entertainment and media. Do you feel that is getting in the way and blocking people from getting to that spiritual self, that spiritual awakening?
So I'm looking around because I want to give you a visual example of my answer. I guess this will be it. Okay. So remember I talked about so the mystic has the experience here, and then it's the journey back to the human here. And then the human is trying to reclaim the divine this way. So I think the same story is true of technology. So the downside of technology is that it disconnects us in many cases from our intuition and the capacity for immediate direct experiences that come much more readily when, for example, we're in nature.
Absolutely.
So just a natural spiritual condition. You spend 4 days alone in nature without an iPod, an iPhone, a screen of any kind. And I guarantee you, with some exceptions, as long as you feel safe, if it's a beautiful place, by the end of those 4 days, you're going to just naturally experience deeper peace, deeper connection, a more contemplative way of being in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, what's happening as technology evolves is that technology itself is moving towards the divine, in the sense that technology is beginning to take on more and more and more the very qualities of whatever we want to call it, divinity or spiritual awakening that we seek. So for example, just as social media can disconnect you from this because you're preoccupied with who likes you and how many people like you and who is that weirdo that posted that terrible thing, right?
Right.
In the same respect, it is also step by step building the lived experience, for example, with Facebook, that we are connected to over 40 million people in the blink of an eye.
Look what we're doing right now.
Look at like what we're doing right now.
Right.
And this
connection.
You know, this is oddly not very different than what the ancient sages used to say, which is that everyone, if in the right conditions, has access to all information, is connected to the consciousness of all people. Well, that's the internet. I mean, all information, all people. But again, how you hold it changes whether it takes you up or it disconnects you.
So basically, we have to make sure that we get a grip, maybe, just a balance. It's that balance.
That's where the balance is, yeah.
Really. Disconnect if you have to. I can't even tell you the last time I took 4 days without my phone. Oof, tough, I teach my children, get off the computers, get off of everything, and get outside. I want you to go play outside. You mentioned a story that I completely related to when you were a kid. You went out in the woods, in the wilderness, and you had that experience that you knew that you were on this quest, that you were on this journey. And I did too. My time was underneath the holly tree, looking up, laying right down on the leaves, looking up from the holly tree, looking into the sky, in the snow. It was actually a foot of snow on the ground. Yeah. And that was my moment in time, just your experience. And I want my children to have that. I don't want them to be playing Minecraft and miss that opportunity. So it's my job as a parent to make sure that they have that disconnection from all that technology. And, and they also can enjoy it, to reach out. I mean, unfortunately, the downside of it is that you have so many images and people's thoughts, other people's thoughts.
Right.
It's almost like my human brain can't even decipher what is truth and what is false and what is just someone else's reality that's not even real. It's just their interpretation of reality, which is not even correct.
Yes, and one of the challenges that you're highlighting is that just as extraordinary wisdom, solutions, and connection is available on the internet and social media and media in general, it also reflects, the totality of the human experience, which means the highs are all there. The altruism is all there. But we all also have, a limbic region to the brain that's built around fight or flight and primal drives. And if a company can exploit our fear of not being worthy enough or not feeling good enough or smart enough or beautiful enough or whatever it is, then we can easily be hijacked neurologically, not just neurologically, but emotionally. And then what happens is our attention goes away. It retreats from the potential of this incredible network that we're connected to. And then we develop this weird kind of obsession with that which is nothing more than a distraction. I mean, and I think we all, even the most supposedly enlightened of us, have found ourselves in moments where we're thinking, like, could I just spend an hour looking that up? Like, would it really matter if Joe Pesci was in that movie? I don't know.
So funny. It's true.
So we go through these absurd things. Now, the balance, you said balance is a great word, because it doesn't mean that being spiritual is always being in this elevated state where we're always peaceful and quiet and tranquil. That's not the idea. It's not like you can't enjoy a good, whatever, Saturday Night Live skit or something like that. But the idea is, in spirituality in general, I think, is to cultivate a quality of self-awareness, or what some people call metacognition. The awareness of our awareness, the ability to think about our thoughts, so that in any moment we can pull ourselves out of the game, remember it's a game, and then evaluate what is the next best step. And frankly, this is what athletes do, musicians do, top performers in all fields do it, and that's the nature of the spiritual quest.
That's a really great point. Very, very great point. I like that. You said metacognition.
Yes.
All right. I like that a lot.
Metacognition. And again, think of the term spiritual practice. Well, what are you practicing for? You're practicing for life. You're practicing for, you can sit there and read your Bible or sit on your meditation cushion and be blissed out for 30 minutes until someone calls you, or the kids are too loud, or the neighbor plays their music and you're distracted. But the practice is to prepare you to maintain that quality of awareness and equanimity and connection when you get up and get back into the game.
So finally, because I have my dog, by the way, this is Jasmine.
Hi, Jasmine.
One of my dogs who's being pain in the butt right now. So this is a lot. I think I have another 5,000 questions for you about religion, and
we'll do this again.
We have to. We definitely have to. But I think we could close it with a suggestion for creating that balance between social media and all this, what would you suggest to anyone watching, how they can have that balance, disconnection, as well as enjoying it as well, to have that balance? Like I said, there's no other way of saying it.
So let's assume that each time we get together, we're going to give people practical tips and ideas.
Okay.
But if I were to give just one right now, I would say it has to do with reevaluating your relationship to time. And I would encourage people to carve out and fiercely protect unplugged time. And this doesn't have to be complicated, but whether it's, so what I recommend is that you actually break it down into 4 levels: a way to pull out of the moment, a way to pull out of the day, a way to pull out of the week, and a way to pull out what you might call once a season. So once a season, what that means is find some time to be on retreat. And whether it's 24 hours or 4 days, literally plan time in a place that is nourishing and replenishing, where there are no demands on your ego, where you are disconnected from overconnection, and let your experience speak to itself. And I don't care if that's just a tropical vacation and everyone agrees that for 4 days you're going to do nothing but sit on the beach and boogie board or whatever.
Cut that phone off.
Fine for me. But it's got to be present. That's the key, that you have to be present to the experience.
Right.
It could also be a silent retreat at a monastery or a Buddhist center, whatever, but you get the idea. Then
Sometimes
once a week, you need to have an immersion as well. And that would not necessarily be like a trip to church, but probably an hour of some very deep, uninterrupted, quality personal time where you get to slow down. And believe me, for most people today, an hour is hardly enough. But that means, if you could do 2 hours a week where you literally, it's just you au naturel, right? And whether that's for a walk in the park or a spa day at home, whatever it is, it's just unplugged. And then you replicate the same daily, which would be to take 5 to 15 minutes where you literally do nothing but sit with your breath, reflect on your life,
Slow down.
Just slow down. Just slow down. And then finally, I would recommend that people also cultivate a tool for how they manage moment to moment when you feel yourself speeding up because of emotional upset or conflict or disappointment. And typically that would be to use a breathing technique, some kind of basic practice in through the nose, down into the belly, hold breath for a count of 4, long exhale, and just repeat that whenever you feel yourself going off the rails.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's enough. Amazing. If people can do that, I'll tell you, they'll start to feel the change.
It's called Return to the Sacred. I love this book. I can't wait to talk more about it, and we will talk to you soon. Correct. Thank you so much. I had so much fun with you today.
Me too.
Okay. I'll talk to you later.
Talk to you later.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.